Israel launched a horrific attack inside Lebanon this September, which injured nearly 3,000 people and killed dozens, including 4 children. In order to carry out this attack, Israeli intelligence agents put explosives inside pagers and walkie-talkies that then blew up, causing chaos and mayhem in Lebanon. Now, defenders of Israel say that the targets of the attack were militants from the armed group Hezbollah, but in reality, many civilians were injured and some were killed in this attack. And in response, the Lebanese armed group Hezbollah has said that this is an act of war against Lebanon as a country. Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah said, quote, "It is an act of war against the people of Lebanon, Lebanon's sovereignty. It is a declaration of war." The Washington Post reported that U.S. officials know it was Israel behind the attack, and I'll be looking at reports showing how U.S. intelligence agencies knew that Israel was planning this attack for years. U.S. officials also told NBC News that they know that Israel was behind this attack, and they acknowledged in this report that among the 4 children killed in this Israeli attack were an 11-year-old boy and a 9-year-old girl. The girl who was killed by Israel was in 4th grade. Her name was Fatima Abdullah, and her family already held a heartbreaking funeral. Now, this Israeli attack has unleashed massive global backlash, and many people are saying that it is an act of terrorism. In fact, even the former director of the CIA, Leon Panetta, has said that Israel's attack in Lebanon using pagers is a, quote, form of terrorism, end quote. The former director of the CIA, which is the master of carrying out terror attacks like this, assassinations, coup attempts, these other very shady covert operations, even they are acknowledging that this is terrorism. Now, despite the fact that civilians were killed and injured in this attack, Israel's supporters will claim, well, it was only targeted against Hezbollah, ignoring the fact that even if some Hezbollah operatives were killed in these explosions, in many cases they were with their family members. They were driving a car with their family members. They crashed the car and their family members were injured or killed. They were at a grocery store with their family members and it blew up and injured or killed people around them. There were many civilians, including children and women and family members, who were with these people when the pagers and walkie-talkies exploded. This was an act of terrorism. In fact, after the attack, there was a session held by the UN Security Council, and in this meeting, Russia and China denounced this attack. The Russian representative referred to it as a terror attack and pointed out that Israel would not have been able to carry out this terror attack were it not for the support that it has received from the United States. China's representative in the UN Security Council said that his country was shocked that the attack was unheard of and violated international law. He said that the Israeli attack, quote, deserves nothing but condemnation, end quote. The Chinese representative also said that, quote, decisions should be taken to stop Israel from going forward with its aggression. Now, this horrifying attack is historic on many levels. What Israel has done is open Pandora's box. This is going to have massive repercussions around the world, not only politically, but also economically. Because in order to carry out this attack, Israel manufactured these pagers and walkie-talkies using the name of a Hungarian company, so from Europe, that also had an agreement with a Taiwanese technology company to use their brand. So now what we see is a massive backlash with people in the so-called Middle East and West Asia and many other parts of the global South saying that we can no longer trust technology from Western companies or technology created by companies from regions that are allied with the West, like Taiwan, which is part of China, but is governed by authorities that are very pro-Western. So now this Israeli attack has many people asking, can we trust any phones or computers or cars or any other technology that we buy from a US company, from a European company, from a Japanese or South Korean or Taiwanese company? And this is also at a time when the US is waging economic war and a trade war on China and telling people around the world they cannot trust Chinese products, that instead they should only buy products from the West and its allies. But now we know that the US and its allies are willing to weaponize this civilian technology and turn it into bombs to blow up people they don't like. So this is only going to further fragment global supply chains, and this ironically could end up helping China by increasing China's popularity in the global south among countries that don't trust the West, the Western countries that colonized them and invaded them and bombed them and occupied them. Instead, they're going to say, we should rely on Chinese supply chains and Chinese technology. In fact, there are reports on Chinese social media of people who run factories that they actually are now flooded with orders from the Middle East, from West Asia, with customers demanding that all of the supply chain must be located inside mainland China. Clearly, there's a lot of demand for Chinese technology, and these customers do not want any part of the supply chain from the West. And this is really what Western governments do not understand. The world today is no longer the world of the 1990s. In fact, today, the majority of countries on Earth have China as their largest trading partner, not the US. In 1990, yes, the US, Germany, and Japan were major industrial powers, and they were the leading trading partners of many countries. But in the past 3 decades, the situation has completely changed. Today, China makes up 35% of the entire world's manufacturing production. The US only makes up 12%, Japan makes up 6%, Germany makes up 4%, and India and South Korea each make up 3%. Now, that is just the data for all manufacturing production. But if you look at the global market share for major technologies, like, for instance, phones, you can see that China is becoming very influential. So if you look for the second quarter of 2024 at the most popular phone brands on Earth by the number of shipments, you can see that number 1 is Samsung, which is South Korean. Number 2 is Apple, which is ostensibly a US company, but in reality, most of the supply chain is located in China. But the third, fourth, and fifth most popular phone brands in the world are all Chinese. Xiaomi comes in a close third place, right behind Apple. Vivo, another Chinese company, is in fourth place. And Oppo, another Chinese company, is in fifth place. So very quickly, Chinese brands have been catching up with Western rivals. If you look at personal computers, you can see a very similar trend. In 2023, the company with the largest market share, 25% of the global PC market, this is for both desktops and laptops, was Lenovo, 25%. That is a Chinese company, Lenovo. In second place and third place was HP and Dell. Apple was in fourth. And then the fifth and sixth placed companies were Asus and Acer, which are both Taiwanese companies. So yes, the US companies do have a larger market share globally in the PC market for desktops and laptops, but that's also changing over time, and Chinese competitors are going to have more and more market share. And this is before Israel and the US and Western allies weaponized the supply chain and weaponized the civilian technology and turned it into bombs to kill people. This trend is now going to accelerate as more and more people in the global south say, we can no longer trust Western technology. Instead, let's buy technology from China or Russia or other manufacturers. Now, let's provide some context here. One of the questions that many people have been asking is, where did these pagers and walkie-talkies come from? How did Israel put the explosives in this technology that then blew up and killed dozens of people and injured thousands in Lebanon? Well, the New York Times published a report that provides information from the inside. Of course, the New York Times is very closely linked to US spy agencies like the CIA. And in this report, they cite anonymous US intelligence officials. It is titled, "How Israel Built a Modern-Day Trojan Horse Exploding Pagers." This article, which by the way pointed out that 4 Lebanese children were killed in the Israeli terror attack, it quotes 12 current and former defense and intelligence officials who were briefed on the attack and say that Israel was behind it. They revealed that Israel created a shell company that posed as an international producer of pagers. The name of the company was BAC Consulting, and it was officially based in Hungary, in Europe. And Hungary, which is a very right-wing government, is very closely allied with Israel. Hungarian leader Viktor Orban has praised Netanyahu. He's extremely anti-Muslim and very anti-Palestinian, and he has joined the US in UN votes in opposing Palestinian human rights, in supporting Israel's occupation, and supporting Israeli colonialism. So Israel created this shell company based in Hungary called BAC Consulting, and they were under contract to produce walkie-talkies and pagers on behalf of the Taiwanese company Gold Apollo, but it was an Israeli front. So this is very important. They were under a Taiwanese name, Gold Apollo. And the Taiwanese authorities have claimed that they had nothing to do with this. They knew nothing about this. I'm pretty skeptical about that. But regardless, the point is that Taiwan is involved, Hungary is involved, and Israel was the one that carried this out. Israel also created other shell companies to mask the identities of the people behind the operation, which were Israeli intelligence officers. And BAC, this Hungarian company that was created by Israel, they actually had ordinary clients, and it did produce ordinary pagers for people. So this again shows that Israel, with the support of the Western powers, has weaponized civilian technology and the global supply chain. Furthermore, this is not the only example of this. This article in the New York Times pointed out that Israel has acquired new means to hack into phones, activating microphones and cameras remotely to spy, and therefore Hezbollah ordered its supporters, its operatives, to not use any cell phones, not even encrypted messaging apps, because they know that Israel can spy on people and use their phones regardless of the software. They're using the hardware. This is why Hezbollah has banned the use of cell phones in all meetings and in any discussion of sensitive operations. And this is why they were using walkie-talkies and pagers. The New York Times concluded this report, noting that people in Lebanon, quote, now live in a world in which the most common of communication devices can be transformed into instruments of death, end quote. But it's not just people in Lebanon. It's everyone. It's all of us. The US and its allies, like in Israel and in Europe, in places like Hungary, its allies in Taiwan, the separatists that the US backs in Taiwan that are trying to separate from China, despite the fact that, according to international law, Taiwan is part of China. All of these different people, these different groups, their companies cannot be trusted anymore. And more people in the global south, countries, companies, are now going to seek alternatives, and it's going to fragment global supply chains as they seek alternatives to Western technology. And this is so ironic because for years, the US government has been telling people around the world, you cannot trust Chinese technology. You cannot trust anything created by Huawei because supposedly Huawei will spy on you. The US ordered its vassals in Europe to remove any Huawei technology from their telecommunications infrastructure. And pretty much all of the governments in Europe obediently obeyed. They went along with what the US wanted and removed Huawei. And now this has led, for instance, in the UK, to Britain having some of the worst internet connections, some of the worst 5G connections in the industrialized world. The irony is that Washington's accusations against Huawei are deeply hypocritical because it is exactly what the US does. As Business Insider, the mainstream media outlet, noted, this is a headline, quote, "The US says Huawei has been spying through backdoors designed for law enforcement, which is what the US has been pressuring tech companies to do for years." Back in 2015, the director of the US National Security Agency, the NSA, which is notorious for spying on people, the NSA director admitted that the US spy agency has been putting backdoors in technology companies. I'm reading an article from The Guardian in 2015, quote, "The National Security Agency Director, Mike Rogers, on Monday sought to calm a chorus of doubts about the government's plans to maintain built-in access to data held by US technology companies," end quote. He referred to them as backdoors, and he claimed that they would not ruin international markets for US technology products. Well, maybe he was right about that, but today, now, turning these devices into bombs that could blow up and kill you, I think that definitely is going to ruin the reputation of these companies in international markets. And by the way, the NSA not only spies on its own citizens, but the NSA has been spying on many countries around the world, including leaders of countries that are supposedly US allies, like Germany. Famously, this was exposed by WikiLeaks a decade ago, that the NSA had tapped the German government and was listening to the phone calls of Germany's longtime leader, Angela Merkel. The reason we learned about this in the first place was because the former CIA and NSA whistleblower, Edward Snowden, he released a bunch of information back in 2013 and 2014, exposing how the NSA was spying on the entire world. And then later, in 2021, the government of Denmark admitted that they had been helping the US to spy on Angela Merkel and to spy on other governments in Europe. This is how the US treats its so-called allies. Imagine how the US treats its adversaries. And by the way, back in 2014, when Edward Snowden leaked this information, it was reported that the NSA had hacked into the servers of Huawei. This is at a time when Huawei was not a household name. Not many people in the West knew about the company. It was growing very quickly. But in 2023, Huawei confirmed that it was true that the NSA had hacked the headquarters of Huawei. So, as it is said, every accusation is a confession. All of the accusations that the US makes about China are psychological projection for what the US does around the world, putting in backdoors to spy on people, doing mass surveillance of its own citizens and people around the world. And of course, Israel does this as well. We know this from the Lebanon pager attack, but the Washington Post reported back in 2021 on the infamous Israeli company NSO Group and its spyware Pegasus. The Washington Post noted that military-grade spyware licensed by this Israeli company was used to hack dozens of smartphones belonging to journalists, human rights activists, and business executives. Reuters also reported on this back in 2023. This article is titled, "Israeli Spyware Used to Hack Across 10 Countries, Microsoft and Watchdogs Say." This report cited another Israeli company, which is called Quadream, which is different from the other spy company, NSO Group. And it noted that this Israeli company's hacking tools were used against journalists, opposition figures, and advocacy organizations across at least 10 countries, including people in North America and Europe. And in fact, this September, just a few days after the Israeli terror attack inside Lebanon, the president of Ireland, a Western ally, a part of Europe. The president of Ireland accused Israel of spying on him. He said that Israel had somehow gotten access to a letter that he had sent, a private letter that he had sent to Iran, a diplomatic letter. Israel leaked this confidential private letter that was written by the president of Ireland. It shows how little the Israeli regime cares about the privacy of other countries in the West that are supposedly allies. This shows once again that every accusation made by the West is a confession, and why it's laughable when you read media outlets in the West claim, like in this article in USA Today, how to avoid Chinese tech that may be spying on you. We're told to be afraid that China is spying on us. Meanwhile, the US government and Israel are spying on us and spying on the entire world illegally. But the US government has been trying to scare us for years, claiming that China could be spying on us and that we're susceptible to national security threats posed by China. In 2022, the US Department of Defense published a very long report titled Securing Defense Critical Supply Chains. This was created in response to an executive order that was passed by President Biden, in which he called for the US government to review all of its supply chains to remove any vulnerabilities linked to China. Also in 2022, the US-China Economic and Security Review Commission published a report for the Congress. In this document, they claimed that, quote, the United States is vulnerable to a number of threats stemming from the concentration of many critical supply chain segments in China, including active pharmaceutical ingredients, rare earth elements, castings and forgings, and others, end quote. And they called for the US to diversify the supply chain, to fragment the supply chain, so they're no longer reliant on China. Members of US Congress, especially anti-China hawks, have introduced legislation calling for the US to end its dependence on Chinese supply chains. This has become a very big talking point in Washington. So we've been told to be afraid of China, but in reality, we can now see that it is Israel that has weaponized these supply chains and turned civilian technology into bombs to kill people, including they killed 4 children. And the US government has claimed that it had nothing to do with this attack. Secretary of State Antony Blinken claimed that the US did not know about this attack. But this is contradicted by the statements made by anonymous US intelligence officials who revealed how Israel planned this operation over years. They knew about this. So if the US government knew about this attack for years, and they now want to claim that they had nothing to do with it, at the very least, they gave their green light to Israel to carry out this attack. Because the US knew about it, and if they were opposed to it, because they knew it would kill civilians like 4 children, which is what it did, then they would have stopped Israel. They would have said, look, you can't do this. This would be an act of terrorism. So at the very least, if the US wasn't directly involved, it is complicit because it knew that Israel was planning this terrorist attack and did nothing to stop it. And now what we see is that after years of US trade war and economic war on China and fragmentation of the supply chains, we're seeing a further acceleration of fragmentation of these supply chains. And there was a very interesting article that was published by Bloomberg and republished in the Japan Times titled Exploding Pagers Attack Shakes Global Trust in Supply Chain Security. This report cites US government officials who say if Israel can do this, China can do it too. So ironically, they're fear-mongering about China doing exactly what their own ally did with at least implicit US backing. But what's fascinating about this report is it cites former US intelligence officials who acknowledge that this is not an isolated case. A former senior US intelligence official said that this is simply the latest and most dramatic of a number of supply chain attacks underway around the world. They said that interdiction operations, where goods are intercepted and tampered with before delivery to their ultimate recipient, are rampant. A former FBI official said, quote, infiltrating a supply chain is a pretty standard tool of intelligence services. And they claim, the FBI claims that China has been doing this. But the article reveals that US spies have a history of taking advantage of America's dominance in many supply chains to insert technologies to target rivals. And as an example, the US and Israeli officials carried out a cyber attack inside Iranian infrastructure using the Stuxnet virus. A similar article in the New York Times also admits that the US has been carrying out similar operations, and potentially we could see more of these supply chain attacks in the future. This article in the New York Times is titled, "Israel's Pager Attacks Have Changed the World," and it was written by a lecturer at Harvard University. He wrote that our international supply chains for computerized equipment leave us vulnerable. He noted that the tactics employed by Israel have been used for years. So this is not isolated. This has been going on for years. And he said that our computers are vulnerable. Our cars, our refrigerators, our home thermostats are all vulnerable to these kinds of attacks that Israel and US spy agencies have been carrying out. In this article in the New York Times, this Harvard lecturer pointed out that the United States itself has done this. The NSA has intercepted communications equipment in transit and modified it, using it to spy on people. The NSA did this to spy on Syria, intercepting a router from Cisco, which is an American company. So now we know that no one can trust Cisco anymore because the US will use it to spy on you and maybe use it to blow you up, to kill you. This article also reveals that the FBI has been intercepting technology and using cell phones to spy on people. He said, our supply chains are vulnerable, which means that we are vulnerable. Yeah, we're vulnerable to being blown up by the US and Israel. He also cited the Stuxnet virus, which was planted by the US and Israel inside Iran's infrastructure. But another example is self-driving cars and EVs. In fact, in 2017, WikiLeaks released CIA cables, which reveal that the CIA can hack cars. And in 2015, a reporter from Wired magazine allowed hackers to remotely take over his car while he was driving, and the hackers disabled the engine while he was on a highway. And we now know that the CIA can do the same thing. So now we know that the CIA can hack your car and kill you, or that the CIA and the FBI and the NSA have a history of intercepting this technology in different parts of the supply chain and putting in surveillance technology. We now know that they can put in explosives to kill you. So why would anyone trust technology from the US and Western countries? I think a lot of people are going to say, we should develop our own technology, or at the very least, if we can't, we should get this technology from China. And this is exactly what's happening, especially for countries that are not obedient Western proxies. They're saying, well, China seems to be more reliable because at least China doesn't invade countries. It doesn't bomb countries. It doesn't impose unilateral sanctions on countries and organize coup attempts and regime change operations like the US does constantly. The US is waging war around the world. The US has 800 foreign military bases. So the point I'm getting at here, it's so important to understand that Israel has opened Pandora's box. This Israeli terrorist attack in Lebanon is not just about Lebanon. It's not just about the Middle East, about West Asia. It's not just about the possibility of a wider regional war. Those are, of course, very important issues as well. And they're things that I talk about a lot here at Geopolitical Economy Report. But this issue is global. It involves the entire global economy, and it's going to blow back majorly on Western companies. It's going to fragment supply chains. It has very significant consequences. Now, there is still more that I could talk about here, but this episode is getting really long. I'm going to publish a separate video in which I talk more about Hezbollah specifically. This is an organization that is very much misunderstood in the West. There's so much ridiculous propaganda. I will explain how the origins of Hezbollah are in the Lebanese resistance against Israel's illegal occupation of southern Lebanon after Israel invaded South Lebanon in 1982 and began an official military occupation of 1985. And Hezbollah originated as the response against the Israeli occupation and managed to expel the Israeli military occupiers in 2000, defending Lebanon's sovereignty. And I'm going to talk about this Western narrative that Hezbollah is a so-called terrorist organization. In reality, if you look at a map of countries that recognize Hezbollah as a so-called terrorist group, you can see that it's really the West. It's the United States and some puppets and proxies. The vast majority of the world does not recognize Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. And even some countries in Europe recognize Hezbollah's political arm as a legitimate organization. Now, Hezbollah has both a political party arm and a military arm, an arms wing. And the Hezbollah political arm is a political party that is part of the democratically elected parliament in Lebanon and is in fact part of the coalition in government in Lebanon. So this is a group that has been extremely misrepresented by the West, but this episode is already long enough. I'm going to talk more about what Hezbollah is, what its history is, in a separate video. I will link to that in the description below. On that note, I'm going to conclude. I am Ben Norton. I am the editor-in-chief and founder of Geopolitical Economy Report. I want to thank everyone for joining me today. Please like and subscribe. Please share this, and I will see you all next time.